So thank you for attending. We got people on Zoom, on our Zoom webinar that registered. We also have people that are watching us live on Facebook, and we're going to go right into it. Once again, we appreciate your attendance and your viewing on Facebook. We got people from the United States and basically all over the world tuning in. So welcome everybody. The topic today is about painting. This is a series that we put together called Ask the Building Expert. And it's basically put together for building owners, condo association people, property managers, homeowners, and anybody who's into the construction industry or who wants to learn about any of our interesting topics. So let's go right into it. Painting, primer to the rest of the story. Well, is it easy or is it not? Well, I'm going to be talking about different things to do with painting, but this webinar is about painting, but I won't be really talking to you about like Van Gogh, Picasso, Rembrandt, watercolor, oil base, and works of art in a museum. Today, I'll be talking about painting for homes and buildings. So, is it easy as watching paint dry? Not many people think, well, painting, no big deal. It's kind of easy. You just put paint on the wall or whatever building component. But as you're going to find out, it's not as easy as you think. Okay, so here we go. Required paint attributes. And what does that mean? That basically means that there's qualities of paint that you should be aware of and that you should look for in your painting project. Okay, what actually are they? Okay, you would want the paint to be an easy application and not too difficult where you have to mix four different things together and it becomes kind of complex. You want it fairly easy. You want the paint to have good flow, good application, and you want the paint product to have a continuous protective film. So in other words, when you brush it or use a roller, or even if you spray it, you want the paint to be continuous and not have splotchy areas or spots that are missing and that kind of thing. Okay, what other attributes do we have? High opacity, quick drying, corrosion resistance if you're painting any kind of metal or those kind of objects. Okay, so basically you want the paint to perform as intended and last. You don't want to paint and then 2 years later have to paint again because the quality of the paint you use wasn't that good or the workmanship wasn't that good either. Other attributes we talk about would be water and heat resistance, color stability. In other words, if you have your house or building painted, you don't want the paint fading in a couple of years. So you want the color to be pretty much stable, but the darker colors will tend to fade over time and paint will fade. It's not going to last forever. And the other thing would be abrasion and scratch resistance. Now, the taggers that are doing graffiti, most of them aren't aware of these attributes, and a lot of them don't care. They just buy a spray can and go to town. Also, you want durability. You want the paint to have flexibility, and you want the paint to be easily cleaned. If the paint product goes on a wall and it gets dirty and you can't clean it, then you're going to have to repaint. So there has to be some kind of thing in the paint will make it easy to clean. Now, some paint, it's very difficult to clean, but this is just a factor to consider. Now, got repaint specifications. Well, what are the specifications anyway? Now, Normally, when you buy paint, either on the can or you can go online or ask for specific instructions on the use of the paint and how it's to be applied. And in my industry, we're painting large projects. And when I say large, you're talking about a 40-story high-rise building that may have 500 units in it, or a uh, townhouse development that has 55 townhouse buildings and 550 units. So pretty big, but the same information I'm giving you today applies to whether it's one house or a huge building. Okay, it's all pretty much the same. So the specs actually are written to tell you how to use the paint and what the application instructions would be. For instance, there would be a section on cleaning, a section on how to store the paint, a section on when to use the paint. In Hawaii, it's not that bad, but in areas on the mainland and in other countries where the temperature gets down to below freezing, you, you can't paint because then the paint would just freeze. And then if it's too hot, it's not going to dry, or you're going to have other issues. So the painting specs are needed, much needed, especially on bigger projects. If it's one house, I would say get the specs anyway, just so that you have backup reference, and make sure the contractor follows those specs. That's basically instructions on what to do. Okay. Now let's talk about various types of paint. There's actually more types of paint than what I'm going to talk about today, but these are the most common. And we're talking about types of paint and the finishes. So there's oil base, there's water base, and there's primer. And a lot of people say that, well, primer is basically not a paint, but in the beginning, it it wasn't. It was just paint that you put on before you put the real paint on. But lately, there's primer mixed into the finished paint and things like that. So I consider primer to be a paint also. Okay, now breaking down each individual type, the oil-based paint is described as either enamel or commonly used for exterior wood, metal, concrete, and it's basically um, a harder and more durable paint than, say, a water base. And it kind of creates a somewhat glossy finish. And the drying time is probably 24 hours or 8 to 24 hours, depending on ventilation, humidity, sun, shade, and those kind of things. Uh, Water-based paint is commonly described as either a latex or acrylic paint, and it takes less time to dry, but it's less glossy and less durable. And by the way, exterior paint could be oil-based or water-based. And then let's talk about the primer. A primer is an important component in a painting project, and it could be oil-based or water-based primer. But there's a caveat, because if you have water-based paint, you need a water-based primer. Okay? If you have oil-based paint, you can use the oil-based primer, or you can actually apply the oil base over a water-based primer. Okay. Now, be aware that in the industry, there's salespeople who say that there's self-priming paint. In other words, the directions say you don't need to use any primer. You just use this finish paint, and it has built-in primer. Okay, well, that could be good, but be aware of the situation where it says self-priming, but you don't need to clean or power wash. Okay, and I've seen that before, where the paint just goes right on whatever surface and it's not clean, and the paint actually adheres to the surface. But it doesn't work in all cases, because if you have a building that has all this soot from the freeway or um, a smokestack and you don't clean it, eventually the paint's not going to stick. And so I don't really trust that in my industry. Even if the instructions say you don't need to clean, I always demand that there be power washing, pressure washing, or hand cleaning with the cloth and some kind of either water or some kind of thin cleaner to the water that's not corrosive or anything. There's different kind of paint sheens, and there's matte, eggshell, satin, semi-gloss, and gloss, and it depends on basically what the personal preference is. And the most common interior wall paint is probably matte, eggshell, or satin, and it's commonly used in the interior a lot in kitchens and uh, bathrooms. Okay, it's easier to clean. Semi-gloss also is normally used for exterior trim, moldings, doors, interior kitchen and bathroom walls. It's easy to clean. It looks nice, and the shine is actually less than a full gloss. If you want that really shiny look, then you go with the gloss or full gloss, and it's commonly used on woodwork and metal if you want that high shine. And it actually is a nice paint to look at, but it shows a lot of imperfections because of the type of paint. So if you're trying to use it on a wall or something where people are going to look at it and you want it to look nice, it takes several coats of that gloss paint in order to make the appearance that you want. Now, the key factor in a painting project is the preparation. And if the contractor spends 3 times as much time on the prep as opposed to the finished painting, that's reasonable. Because if you don't do a proper preparation, you're going to have failure. And what is proper preparation? Proper preparation is you wash and clean the surface. If you have old paint, loose paint, you scrape the paint off until it's solid and it's not going to come off. You patch and sand. So if there's imperfections in the wood or concrete or whatever the surface is, you fill those in and then you sand it so that the finished paint can go on it and adhere. And then caulking. If you have a dissimilar material, like say a window frame or a door frame that's next to a wall. Okay, so you have a window frame that's aluminum and your wall is concrete or wood, or the window frame could be vinyl. You have to caulk those areas where it's dissimilar building materials. And caulking is the key, because if you don't caulk, water can get in, air can go through, and you don't want those kind of conditions. Okay, so the patching and sanding is important, but you got to use the correct sandpaper. And I've seen situations where the contractor is sanding crown molding or ornate custom-made stair hand railing and pickets on a multi-million-dollar house that's made out of koa, custom made, and the worker is using coarse sandpaper to sand it before they put their clear coating over it. And when I went to look at it, I'm like, whoa, you're actually making these grooves in the wood. So I think you should switch to a more finer grit of sandpaper. And basically, sandpaper, the coarse grit is 40 to 50, the medium is 60 to 100. Then you go rougher. And then if you want to go finer, there's 120 to 220. Very fine, super fine is 240 to up to 600 grit. And basically, when you look at the fine grit of sandpaper, it doesn't even look like sandpaper. It almost looks smooth. But for artists who are making wood sculptures and all that, they have to use the fine grit so that when it's coated, clear coated, you don't see all these scratches and lines and all that. So how does it relate to a house? Well, you want to get the right sandpaper so that when you paint, you don't have these lines and imperfections, as much as possible. And then um, talking about caulking, there's certain types of caulk to use. And I've seen situations where people install new windows and the window contractor caulks it. And then when the painting contractor comes in, he goes, I can't paint over that. Oh, why not? Well, they use silicone caulking and our paint doesn't stick to that. So make sure that if you have windows that need caulking, the caulking is compatible to the painting. And it all makes sense, because if you can't paint over caulking, then already that's a bad situation. And you don't use caulking for your shower or bathtub for caulking exterior windows or doors. That's just not the right kind of caulking. Now, what happens if there's no proper preparation or there's no proper application of the paint? Bunch of things can happen. So let's talk about common painting defects. And there's many more defects or defective situations that I'm describing today, but I'm just talking about the main ones that I've been accustomed to. So if you open up a can of paint and you don't mix it correctly and you start applying it, that's already a defect, because now you have improperly mixed paint. And you could have a situation where the paint is actually lighter, um, from the top of the can, and when you get to the bottom, all of a sudden the color is darker and it doesn't match. Well, why? Because the paint wasn't mixed properly. So gotta mix the paint properly. Now, the painting defects could be blistering, where you look at the paint after it's done and there's blisters on it. It's bubbles and there's air inside it. There could be fading of the color, and the paint could be flaking off. And this could happen uh, maybe 6 months, a year later, or it could happen 5 years later. Okay, so just be aware of those things. Some other defects are flashing, running, or paint sagging. And the flashing is actually where, let's say you're painting a wall and it's super hot and the sun's shining, and the paint, the water or liquid in the paint is just drying up too fast. Okay, that could be a problem. Also, when you have too much paint, then it starts running down and it also sags. But the running paint is basically too much paint on your brush or roller, and it just starts running down. Now, the sagging paint could be a similar situation, although in some cases, like let's say a high-rise building and it's concrete walls, and the painting that you're doing now is probably the third time the building is painted, or maybe the fourth time. There's so much paint on the wall already that a new application, a fourth or fifth coat, would cause sagging. So the weight of that new paint would cause the old paint to start breaking off and sagging down. And that's why there's a key factor where you cannot just keep repainting a building. You get to a point where there's so much paint on the walls where it has to be scraped off because you're going to have that sagging problem. Okay, what other kind of defects are there? Okay, there could be other problems, like I said, mixing or painting when it's too hot, and there's other situations like that. If you're hiring a contractor and you're not happy with the paint job, then what is the problem? It's either a workmanship issue or it's a paint issue. And there have been times where the paint mix from the manufacturer is bad, and we have to return the paint and get a new set of paint. And it could be a mix in a factory where the color didn't match, exactly the same, and that's a paint defect. It's in the paint manufacturer. But more often than not, defective paint job is poor workmanship. They didn't apply the right amount of paint. They skipped a few steps. Maybe their primer was too thin or not applied properly, or other things like that. Or the finish, the preparation work was bad. They didn't sand enough. They didn't fill in the holes. If the wall is concrete and there's cracks in it, the cracks weren't filled, or it's spalling, and the spalling area wasn't repaired, and you painted it, and then 2 years later, a piece of concrete either cracks or falls off. And there's a claim regarding the paint. Hey, you didn't do a good paint job. When the painter says, well, no, I painted it correctly. It was the concrete that cracked. So, therein lies the issue where you got to bring in somebody else, a third party, to go look at it and make a determination, who's at fault here. So basically, that's a brief history of painting, and there's, other factors, but these are the main points that I wanted to get across. I wanted to open it up now to answer any questions. I know people are on Zoom. You can use the Q&A or chat or raise hand feature. We can open your microphone up, or those are on Facebook. If you have questions, you can post on Facebook, and Martin will read it. So it was a very brief presentation, but I'd like to spend some time on the Q&A. All right, Martin, are you still there?
Yep, Lance, I'm waking up now.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, good job, good job. Yeah, this, I think as a homeowner, I've experienced some of these problems and some of the quality stuff. So it's good information for the building and individual homeowners. So appreciate it. Yeah. At this point, let me see. Checking the Zoom side, I don't see any hands raised from our participants here, and let me see if there's anything on our Facebook side, at least from our live audience. No, I don't see any exactly there, but I'd gotten some, I guess, from email in here. So let me ask a few of these. First one here is a contractor painted my concrete patio and walkway with deck paint, but after 2 years, some areas of the paint is peeling off. What do you think is the problem?
The problem could be that when the paint was applied initially, the concrete had moisture in it, and that's a contributing factor to the paint failing. Or maybe it was already painted already, and the application of the new paint didn't properly stick. Maybe the two paints, the initial paint, original paint, and the new paint was not compatible. The other issue would be the paint, the type of paint could have been just standard or general deck paint, where it's basically paint for a walkway surface. Now, there's a difference between deck paint, which is cheaper, and waterproofing. So if you really want to upgrade the waterproofing paint, and there's many different types. There's general waterproofing paint, and there's a whole waterproofing system where there's an application of a mesh, a prime coat, intermediate coat, a finish coat, and so there's layers of paint on it. And naturally, it's more expensive, the waterproofing, and you're going to get more life out of it. Deck paint, for the most part, will last one year. If you look at the manufacturer, their instructions or warranty, basically they're saying 1 year or maybe 2 years. Waterproofing is 5 years plus. So it all depends on the application. So maybe you want to, deck paint is basically regular house paint that's a little upgrade. So that's probably what the problem is. Now, if you want to take a picture and send it to me, I'll be happy to look at it and give you my opinion. So hopefully that answers that question.
Thank you, Lance. Good answer. The next one I have here is, looks like somebody's doing some painting here. I'm hiring a contractor who gave the lowest price, and his price was low due to saving labor cost of power washing and priming my house. He said this is not needed because the paint company said their paint is self-priming. Is that true?
Well, it is true where some paint companies have self-priming paint, and basically there's no primer needed, and you open the can, you mix it, and the primer is built into the paint. So it is true that there are paint manufacturers that sell that. Now, although it's true, I still don't like the fact where these painters are saying we don't have to pressure wash or clean. So my response would be, don't go with the cheaper guy, go with the contractor who is going to clean, pressure wash, power wash, whatever they call it, wash by hand with rags with water or kind of a thin soapy solution, something to get the dust and stuff off your wall. Now, if you haven't painted for 10 years or more, can you imagine how much dirt and dust are on the wall? And if you don't clean it, you're basically painting over dust and grime and stuff. So it's always good to clean it, even if the paint manufacturer says you don't have to. I don't necessarily believe the paint manufacturer. And what's going to happen is if you don't clean it and then the paint doesn't stick and then you make a claim, they're going to go, oh, well, we said you don't need to wash, but you had more of a problem. You had soot from your chimney, or you had soot because you live close to the freeway, or you had too much salt because you live in the ocean, and our warranty doesn't cover that. So just, be careful.
Good advice, Lance. Here's another question that's come in. I have a question about warranties. I hired a contractor to paint my house, and he gave a 10-year warranty. 5 years later, one side of my house has algae growing on the wall. I called the contractor and he said, there is no warranty that covers that. That I'm figuring it must be algae.
Oh, okay. Well, that's actually true. But the contractor should have should have looked at the house and looked at the areas. And it seems like that side of the house is very shady. So let's say that you have a uh, huge tree and the sun never hits that side of the house. So naturally, just because of the location, there's no sun, and you're going to have a lot of moisture. You're going to have algae and other things, building up on the wall. So the contractor should have said, "Hey, just let you know, this may be a problem," and offer to mix algicide or some kind of mold prevention in the paint, and that should have helped with the situation. If he didn't do that, then uh, although he's correct, there could be a response to the contractor saying, "But you didn't tell me that. I'm not a painter. I don't know what the difference is." Oh, well, trim your tree and then it'll get some sun. So there's different responses and different situations, but I think the homeowner should be aware, and if they're not, the contractor should have advised them, and given the homeowner the opportunity to pay extra. And if the homeowner said, "Well, that's okay, I don't want to pay that additional money," then the contractor could say, "Well, I gave you the opportunity and you didn't take it, so I'm not going to do anything. If you want me to repaint it, I can, and I'm going to charge you for that." So it's kind of an interesting situation, but um, hopefully uh, that's the answer that you were looking for. Now, before I forget, I want to let everybody know that we have other webinars coming up. The next one is on condo reserve studies. And after that, we have a series. So in August, we have a series of uh, building safety webinars. We have one on the Florida building collapse in the beginning of August, and we have a building safety. We have preventive maintenance and some other ones. So if you're interested, please join us for those. Go to our website, askbuildingexpert.now.site, to sign up for Zoom. We're going to broadcast it also Facebook Live too. But if you sign up on Zoom, then you're guaranteed to get a reminder. Okay, so any other questions?
Yes, Lance, there's two more that we got here. This one looks like it's a condo building. It says, "My condo building is being painted and the job is $750,000. That is a lot of money. How can the owners be sure that the painting company is using the correct amount of paint?" Good question.
Yeah, actually, it's an interesting question. So let me ask you, Martin, what do you think?
Well, let me see. I'm not a condo owner, but I can kind of think about it here. Yeah, they should obviously just do it right, though.
Well, one thing is, you trust your contractor, but let's say you trust the contractor, but you still want to know. $750,000 for a paint job is not cheap. I mean, that's a big project. So there's different ways that I use when I run uh, painting projects as a construction manager, and I refer to the specifications. Okay. And then I ask the contractor, "Are you following the specs? How many coats of paint? Does the specs call for one prime coat and two finish coats? And then what is your mil thickness of each coat?" And they can give me the answer, oh, 7 mils, or whatever their answer is. But how do I verify that to be a fact? So one thing I would do is uh, go to the paint manufacturer and ask, or go to the contractor and say, "You painted one side of the building I want to know how much paint you ordered for this project and how much paint you used, and then can calculate the spread of the paint by square footage to see if they're using the right amount of paint. So, in other words, the simplest concept is you take 100 square foot of paint, and um, the contractor painted 100 square feet of the wall, and the paint says that this can is good up to 100 square feet. So 1 gallon can equals 100 square feet. This is not real, but I'm just giving you this as an example. So uh, if we check the records and the contractor didn't order or it didn't use enough paint for the square footage, then that's already a red flag. Going, oh, wait a minute. How is it that 1 gallon can of paint, you're able to paint 200 square feet? That means you're not using enough paint. The mill thickness is not thick enough. How do we measure that? There's different ways to measure the thickness of the paint, and that can be done also. So it's interesting. So it's not like we have to just trust that enough paint was put on the wall. There's ways to verify that by looking at the purchase orders, how much paint was ordered, doing testing uh, on construction litigation cases that I work on, where the claim was that they used enough paint. We actually take samples of the paint, send it to a lab, and say, I want to know, uh, if primer was used, or I want to know how thick the paint was by millage. Okay, so it gets technical, but the short answer is there's ways to verify that if you want to. So hopefully that answers that question. We have any others?
I just get one more, Lance, but thank you for the science of painting. That's pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah, the last one I've got here is you mentioned different types of paint, but did not talk about silicone paint. Is this good paint?
Okay, well, let me give you a brief history. Uh, Silicone was actually started being used for roofing, and uh, it was a good product provided they installed it correctly, and there's no defects. And then there was a trend like, okay, if it worked good on roofing, it must work good on walls. And so why don't we try that? So there's a trend now to go with uh, silicone paint. The problem is, and uh, silicone is a good product, and uh, it's good waterproofing product. The problem is that once you put silicone on, you can't put anything else on because nothing else would stick. Okay, you probably could, but you need special primer and all that, and it just becomes kind of crazy. So if you have a building or your house painted with silicone paint, the next time you paint, you have to use that silicone paint again. It's one of those situations. It's like doing a silicone roof. I've inspected a building, high-rise building, where they had leaks in their roof, and it wasn't silicone because at the time the building was built in the 70s, they didn't have that product. And the contractor who did the repair said, I'm going to do a good job for you guys. I'm going to patch all those leaky areas with silicone paint, and it'll never leak again. Okay, in those areas. Okay, that's fine. But now when I have to uh, re-roof the whole building, the roofing material that we're going to coat the roof on will not stick to silicone paint. So guess what? We have to cut out all those patch areas of silicone paint and repair it before we can coat it with a different type of roofing coating. So it may or may not be a problem, but yeah, that's interesting. There's also other types of paint too, not the ones that I mentioned. Uh, there's solar reflective type paint now. There's also paint where there's deck paint where you paint like a pool a walkway or a pool deck, and then when you walk on it with your bare feet, there's no heat on it. So there's that type of paint. They're developing all these other types of paint too, which even I've seen a report where there's something in the paint that kills bacteria, and they're saying that this is good paint for coronavirus kind of thing. And I haven't read all the studies yet, and they're talking about using that paint in doctors' offices, hospitals, and all that. But they're still testing it right now. So, do we have any other questions on either the Zoom platform or Facebook at this time?
Nothing on my side here, Lance. It's all yours.
Okay, I got some questions that were emailed to me. Let me go through that now. You were the construction manager at my building and told the contractor that they were not using the right amount of paint. How did you determine that? Okay, well, I kind of covered that earlier by a paint order. There's a test called a DFT, a dry film test, where there's a device that kind of gives you a reading of the thickness of the paint and all that. And then there's also a test called a adhesion test. And normally that's used for determining whether the paint substrate, original or existing, will be able to handle the new paint going on. But in some cases, we've used that test for other purposes too. So there's different ways to verify. Yeah, even like I said, cutting sections of the paint out and sending it to a lab for analysis. But that's getting into technicalities there. Another email I got was our townhouse is having problems finding the right paint to paint our wood decks. Every product that we tried doesn't seem to work. We even use marine paint, and that doesn't work either. So in answer to the question is, when you're painting wood, like a wood deck, the deck is actually treated, from my perspective, as a roof. It's not the roof of your house, but it's exposed to the sun, the weather, the rain, and you need a good coating. And marine coating is good. They use it on marine paint on ships, submarines, and industrial facilities, but it doesn't seem to work good on wood. So when you have a wood deck, you need basically a waterproofing system rather than just deck paint, as I mentioned before. There's also epoxy type paint that you could use, or a layered system that's part of a waterproofing system. So it's a trial and error basically. And what I would suggest is, if you have townhouse or condo with many wood decks, take one deck as a sample and have the contractor do his work with the product that he's recommended, and test it out, and see how long it lasts. Spray it with water and other things, and really test it out before you agree to use that same product on other decks. Also, talk to the manufacturer's rep, ask him for references. Hey, what other buildings did you use this product on? And go and talk to those other buildings and say, well, what do you guys think? How long did it last? And you either get I don't know, it seems to be holding up, or yeah, it's good, we had no problems, or they go, I would never use that product again. It just doesn't work. So you get an idea. Don't be afraid to go out and ask for references and talk to people. Okay, so I got another email, the last one. Do you recommend elastomeric paint And why? Okay, well, elastomeric paint is a thicker type of paint. It's more rubberized than paint. It costs like 3 times as much as regular paint, including the labor. That's labor intensive. Um, the benefits of it is it's watertight. It's really dense. It's long lasting. It lasts way longer than regular paint. It's bendable. It moves around. It's used for CMU, concrete block, stucco, and concrete walls. And uh, the other benefit is if you have concrete cracks in a wall or ceiling or anywhere, and if you have this elastomeric paint, the paint actually bends and it's flexible. So that crack wouldn't be exposed if it's just a hairline crack because the elastomeric paint would cover that up. Now, the downside is the high cost, and the painter who's applying it has to be very experienced. And if they're not experienced performing or using elastomeric paint, then they might not be the right people to use. Also, it gets lumpy. Uh, it it doesn't really penetrate through all the way into the base. And if you nick it, something hits the wall and there's a nick, uh, it's it's hard it's hard to fix. You can't just go and patch it with regular paint. You have to patch it with the same kind of material, and it's it's harder to paint over it. So you paint a high-rise building that has initially elastomeric paint, which is good, but when you do a repaint job, you can't just go and repaint it with oil-based or water-based paint. You kind of have to stick with either elastomeric or come up with a special primer that would have the new paint stick. And then now the cost is like 4 times or getting even higher. So um, that's the answer to that. And hopefully the people that asked the questions are still on the webinar to hear the answer. If not, there's a recording that we also provide. So if you want a replay of the recording, you go to our website and you can watch the on-demand webinars on this subject, and in any other webinars that we've given before. The videos on demand are on the website also. You can watch it anytime, refer people to it. Um, if you're not a contractor, I don't mind by saying, hey, I attended this webinar and this building expert said this, and you're saying that. Can you watch his webinar and tell me if you agree or don't agree? And, why are you telling me this thing when this guy is saying something else? So um, there's also the PowerPoint too that's available for you. And then lastly, before I close it out, we gave a recent interview on the Florida building collapse. And if you go to our website, there's actually a free building safety book that you can download. And the website is floridabuildingcollapse.now.site. And you can watch the video also of the interview that I gave. So, Martin, do we have any other questions or comments before we close this out?
No, Lance, I just kind of checked the Zoom side and Facebook side, and nothing now. So I think you're good. Great job. Thanks for
All right.
educating us all on paint.
Yeah. All right. So, I wanted to add that some people who are attending this webinar, I know they're painters. They're not house painters, but they're artists. They paint murals or things like that. So keep it up. And my wife actually is also a painter. She went to Kapiolani Park and painted Diamond Head, and I thought it was interesting. And I took a photo of it with my phone and I put it on Facebook, and she got like 375 likes or something. So it's interesting, the power of Facebook. And so keep up your art. Art is always good. Once again, thank you everyone for attending. Those who are on Zoom or on our webinar, and those who tuned in on Facebook Live, we're going to do more of these. So we're going to sign off now, and hope to see you at the next one. Thank you.
Okay, live stream is stopped.
Okay, are you able to stop the recording? I clicked the wrong button, sorry.
Let's see.